All right, now it's time to have some fun. This is a couple of life-changing principles that have worked for me, and I know they'll work for you. Um, so let me just explain first. Williams has rules for clarity and rules for coherence. The rules for clarity are within a sentence. How to write clearly within a sentence. The rules for coherence are how to link up those sentences into paragraphs that are coherent. So clarity for sentences, coherence for paragraphs. Now he says, and I agree, that most of the time you can do both. You can write clearly within a sentence in a coherent paragraph. But there may be times where you have to choose. And when you do have to choose, the rules of coherence trump the rules for clarity. So there may be a time when you might write a sentence which is less clear than it could be for the sake of a higher good coherence. So that'll become clear as we start. So we're going to start bottom up, start with a sentence, the building blocks of how to write clearly within a sentence, and then we'll move on to coherence within a paragraph. So first, clearly in a sentence. On page 21 at the bottom, he says, the first two principles of clear writing, here they are. Number one, the subjects of the sentences name the cast of characters. And two, the verbs that go with those subjects name the crucial actions those characters are part of. So, for instance, his example, bottom 21, our lack of knowledge about local conditions precluded determination of committee action effectiveness and fund allocation to those areas in greatest need of assistance. Horrid, terrible sentence. It's very unclear. It starts with our lack of knowledge. The subject there is lack, but lack is not an agent. Lack is not a person or someone doing something. It's an abstract idea. So what if we changed our lack to we lack? Now it's clear. Instead of our lack of knowledge, blah, 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 we lack knowledge about. So just, and we'll fix the rest of the sentence too, but just you can see at the start how that makes a big difference. So those are his two principles. Here's how I explain them, I think a little bit simpler for me and maybe for you. So the first rule of clarity is the agents, the subjects of your sentence should be agents. So the grammatical subjects, the subjects of your sentence, make them agents. Now, this won't happen all the time, but in the clearest writing, it does. So if your subjects are agents doing something, that's more clear than them not being agents. The second rule is the verbs of those subjects should be active. Now, not every verb will be active, but in the clearest writing, verbs are active. So subjects are agents, verbs are active. Those are the two rules. Now they come with corresponding negatives. The thing to avoid with the subjects, you want to make your subjects agents. That's clear. You want to avoid what he calls nominalizations. Look at page 30, where he describes what he means by nominalizations. A nominalization, which is a word I believe he coined, other writers and professors, they call them zombie nouns, which I think is maybe even more memorable. But it's where you take a verb or an adjective and you turn that thing into a noun. So on page 30, near the bottom, the verb is discover. The noun form would be discovery. The verb is move. The nominalization would be movement. Resist, resistance. React, reaction. Fail, failure. Refuse, refusal. Careless, carelessness. Difficulty, difficult, difficulty. Different, difference. Elegant, elegance, and on it goes. So, for example, think of the sentence, very simple sentence, Columbus discovered America. You see how that is clear? Columbus is an agent, active verb, discovered America. You don't have to think twice about that. You just know what it means. But now let's mess it up and say Take out the agent Columbus and instead put in a nominalization, take the verb and make that the noun and the subject of a sentence, and then use a passive verb. So you get this. Instead of Columbus discovered America, you get the discovery of America was made by Columbus. See how that's just, it takes you a click or two to understand exactly what that was? Because Columbus discovered America, that is crystal clear. But take that verb discover, turn that into a noun discovery, make that the subject. The discovery of America, and now a passive verb, was made by Columbus. It's convoluted, it's long, it's ponderous, and it's just not as clear. So that's why he says, in the clearest writing, we have the subjects are agents with strong active verbs. So you want to avoid nominalizations or zombie nouns, and you also, in the clearest writing, want to avoid passive verbs. On page 36 and 37, and again, you have this on Moodle, you can follow along easily enough. On page 36, he describes what a passive verb is versus an active, and he there's a very technical way to describe it, but when you hear the words that describe it, it's just like words, but the example makes sense. So active under the heading passive and agents, the active sentence is, the partners broke the agreement. So you have the subject expresses the agent of an action, and the object expresses the goal or the thing changed by the action. Again, I told you the words are just, but the partners broke the agreement. That's clear. That's active. Passive would be, the agreement was broken by the partners. So in passive sentences, he says, the subject expresses the goal of an action, a form of be precedes a past participle form of the verb, and the agent of the action may or may not be expressed in a by phrase. So again, just words. But the agreement was broken by the partners. You see why that's passive. So again, you will use passive verbs at times, and we'll explain that in a minute. But what he's saying is, in the clearest writing, you avoid them. You avoid nominalizations and avoid passive verbs. On page 38, bottom of 37, he says, when you might want the passive, he says, top of 38, if you don't know or don't care who did the action, then you might use a passive. You also might use a passive to, what he says, maintain a logically consistent string of subjects. To explain that, he explains it there, but page 47 is another helpful explanation. On page 47, under managing the flow of information, see letter A there? He says, he has this sentence in letter A. A black hole is created by the collapse of a dead star. Now that is a passive verb. So you might think, well, I want to be more clear. I'll write that actively. And so letter B is an active sentence. The collapse of a dead star into a point no larger than a marble creates a black hole. So that's better, right? Because it's active. Well, not if that sentence fits in this paragraph. Look at the paragraph underneath that. What if your first sentence was, some astonishing questions about the nature of the universe have been raised by scientists exploring the nature of black holes in space. So that sentence ends with black holes in space. And we'll explain more later why it's important to often, you want your sentences to be coherent, right? These are the rules of coherence we'll talk about in a moment. But you want your sentences to link up. So if you end a sentence with black holes in space, it will be helpful if your next sentence begins with something about black holes. That way the reader is not lost. So if you end with black holes in space, if your next sentence is, the collapse of a dead star into a point, perhaps no larger than a marble, creates a black hole, well, now you just ended 2 consecutive sentences with black hole. And as we'll see with the rules of coherence, what you say last is what you stress. The emphasis always falls on the end of a sentence. So if you end 2 consecutive sentences with the same phrase, it sounds like you're just spinning your wheels. You're just repeating yourself. You're not going anywhere. So if you end that first sentence with black holes in space, the next sentence should start with that concept. And for that, you might use a passive verb. So letter A is what you might use. A black hole is created by the collapse of a dead star into a point perhaps no larger than a marble. So this is what we were talking about, that the rules of coherence trump the rules of clarity. It's more clear to use an active verb, but sometimes, in order to link up sentences securely so the reader's not lost, you end this sentence with black hole, and so you want the next sentence to start with a similar concept so they're clearly connected. You might need a passive verb to get that black hole phrase up to the beginning of that second sentence. So the rules of coherence within a paragraph, they do trump the rules of clarity within a sentence. But most of the time, I find I can write active verbs with coherence. I can do the rules of clarity and the rules of coherence. On page 59, he has a funny example of how people will use bad writing, nominalizations, passive verbs, to obscure what they're trying to say. So page 59, this is from an owner's manual. It says, page 59, the big block quote, second sentence. This plate, front suspension pivot bar support plate, connects a portion of the front suspension to the vehicle frame, and its failure could affect vehicle directional control, especially during heavy brake application. Notice there, it's failure. Failure is a nominalization, right? Fail would be the verb, but notice there's no agent failing. It's just its failure. So they took the verb fail, made that into a noun, failure, and then made that the subject of the phrase. And it softens it. It makes it less scary, less offensive, less in your face, less direct. Its failure could affect vehicle directional control. Directional, another nominalization, make direct, make it into directional, particularly during heavy brake application. Application, another nominalization, the verb would be apply. So notice how this last phrase, there's no agent doing anything. It's heavily nominalized, especially the main verb fail. What if you fixed that and wrote that sentence directly? You would get this, right above the heading on that page, designing topics. He fixes it and says this: if you brake hard and the plate fails, you will not be able to steer your car. That's what that sentence means. But to soften it, because they don't want to scare the driver, they take out the agent you, take the verbs, make them into nouns, and make those the subject of the phrase. So writing, what he's saying is how to write clearly within a sentence with agents and strong active verbs. There are times where you might want to soften the news, though. And so if you have bad news, you might want to take out the agents and use passive verbs. Like, let's say you're a minister of the gospel, and you've been called late at night to go with the police to someone in your church family. Their child has been in a car accident and the child is dead. Horrific news to convey. You don't want to be direct in this moment, right? You do not want to say, hello, Mary, your child's dead. Hello, Tom, Susie's dead. That's just way too direct. You want to prepare them, right? They know it's going to be bad news, but you soften it as best you can. You say, there has been a terrible accident. Hear how you took out the agent? There has been a terrible accident. Your daughter, Susan, was involved, right? No agents, just very passive. She was injured, another passive verb. She was rushed to the hospital, right? The doctors did all they could. Notice how that's direct now, agent. The doctors did all they could. You're trying to emphasize something positive, so you do it as directly as you can with agents doing active verbs. But they were unsuccessful. And sorry to tell you, she has passed away. See how you directly state the positive, reassuring news, and when you have bad news, you take out the agent, use a passive verb, and it just softens it. I think there are people that Maybe you're naturally offensive and they don't know why. Well, maybe you're just too direct. Maybe you're direct all the time. Other people might be mealy mouth and they said, I told them, why didn't they hear me? Well, maybe you told them in an indirect way. Maybe you need more agents doing active things when you tell them. In fact, one more and then we're out of time again, but look on page 60 for a good example of this. Actually, 61 at the bottom. Thomas Jefferson knew these tips for writing. He used them in our founding document, the Declaration of Independence. It starts out this way. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station which the laws of nature of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Notice how no one's really doing anything? When in the course of events, stuff happens, right? Jefferson wrote this, and Ben Franklin's over there in France trying to raise money for the colonists. And if they were to say, "We are rebelling against England. We are the revolutionaries. Join our revolt," that would be way too strong. You Americans, you settle down. So Jefferson knows this might be a tough sell. So he takes out the agent. No one's doing anything. It's just when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary. On page 62, at the bottom, the second half, when he explains why the colonists are not doing anything, he talks about King George. And notice how all of the agents come back. He has refused his assent to laws. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws. He has refused to pass other laws. How about 63? He has called together. He has dissolved houses of parliament. He has excited domestic insurrections. He, all the way through. That's just really good writing, right? When you have something positive to say, speak directly with agents doing something. If you've got bad news, you can soften it by taking out the agents and making that verb into a noun and make that the subject of your sentence. And then use a passive verb. And it will be just a lot easier. And to go over a lot easier. But this is knowledge is power, right? And now you know. And this can actually be used in a pretty bad way, which we're going to talk about when I see you next.